Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Robbins, and welcome to LPLE from Dialogue FM. We're the podcast that lets you practice listening in English. We speak English slowly and clearly so that you can follow along and understand native English speakers more easily. I'm excited to help you improve your English listening skill, as well as help you learn new vocabulary, grammar, and idioms commonly heard in conversations among native English speakers. If you want to practice listening in English, then we invite you to join our conversation. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jesse.
For all of our LPLE listeners, thank you all very much for your support, for your listenership, and for your comments. As I mentioned on our Facebook page, today I'd like to introduce you to our new host of LPLE, Jane Cater. Jane, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Jesse. Thank you. I have been a foreigner or working with foreigners my entire life. I have loved listening to people talk since I was a tiny child. And I also loved listening to people sing. My parents always had opera records playing, and as soon as I could read, I would try to read along with the words, which were translated from French or German or Italian, and I was fascinated with that. And I think that's probably why I became a language teacher, a singer, and an actress. I studied French first, and then I went to France, ended up marrying and staying there for years. And I couldn't teach French there, so of course I taught English. And here I am still teaching English.
That's fantastic. Now, where do you teach English?
I currently teach at City University of Seattle. I have taught in Romania as a Fulbrighter. I have taught at Seattle Pacific University. I've taught in France, and I've taught at various community colleges and even in summer programs at University of Washington.
This is fantastic. One of the things I like about our relationship is we have many different characteristics, but yet we have many similarities as well. And one of those similarities is our love of foreign language and the process of learning a language. I mean, you mentioned that you studied French for a number of years and can speak French fluently. So you have a lot of experience with more of the European language system, listening to different European languages, understanding similarities between the languages. And then for me, most of my language studies have all been in East and Southeast Asia. So you and I together can bring to the listening audience some really helpful perspectives on what it's like to learn the English language.
Yes, that's right. And I think whether you're coming from a very different system from your own or a similar system, there are some things that everybody has in common. And then it does diverge sometimes, especially on the grammar. But what's going on in your head and your emotions is pretty similar wherever you're coming from, at least in my experience.
Well, speaking of emotions, this is a really good opportunity for us to talk about something that you and I found really interesting when we thought about it, right? Part of living in another country and learning about another culture is food, right? And as we were talking, we realized that how we describe food can sometimes be how we describe people.
Oh, yes.
Right? And that's an important part of the English language. So today we want to talk about how we describe different tastes for people, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the first one that comes to mind is sweet. You know, we talk about what is something that's sweet.
Well, in terms of food, of course, sugar is the first thing that comes to mind. Then fruit, honey, some kinds of wine, etc.
Well, pastries. So you come from
Pastries,
France, right? So you
yes.
think of some very sweet pastries, the chocolate croissant. How do you say it?
Croissant? You were close.
And then we think of sweet desserts in Japan. Mochi, for example, is a very kind of Japanese dessert that can be very sweet. So, right, when we think of sweet, we usually think of food and pastries and cakes and fruit and the like. However, we can also describe someone as being sweet. Like, for example, Jane, you are a very sweet person.
And I would take that as a compliment, but if you ever said I were sugary, I would really hate it.
So what does sweet mean? You know, when we describe somebody as being sweet, what kind of personality do you think they have?
I think that has actually changed in my lifetime. Sweet, I think, used to mean friendly, but a little maybe too much trying to please other people, that sort of thing. And today, I think it means kind, and actually, it's more of a compliment now than it used to be. I also think that the term sweet used to be only to describe women or girls, and more I'm hearing it to describe men, and I think of it as a lovely quality: kindness, understanding how to be with other people, easy to be with,
Sympathetic, good
definitely.
listener.
Exactly.
So, generally speaking, it's pretty safe to say that when you describe somebody as sweet, it's a compliment.
It is now. I'm not sure it always was. And particularly, I think 25 or 30 years ago, calling a man sweet, at least an American man, I don't think he would have considered it a compliment.
That's a good point. Over time, the meanings and emotions of words can change. Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, sweet is a positive quality, a compliment. To call somebody sour. So this person has he's very sour. Sour grapes. This person is described as being sour grapes. The taste of sour, where do we find, in terms of food, what would be considered sour?
Certainly lemons or limes. Let's see of course, vinegar, very famous for being sour. Sometimes, unfortunately, wine can be too sour. After that, I think the next thing I think about is actually people.
Well, for sour,
to tell you the truth,
some people like sour, right?
Yes.
So it's not that the taste of sour is bad. It's the reaction some people have to sour. It makes our body tense. It sometimes can be very shocking in the mouth, right?
True.
Typically, we have a very tense reaction to something sour, something very shocking. And so because of that, it has a bit of a negative connotation.
It can if it's left alone without any other context, that's for sure. Yes.
So when we describe somebody as being sour in that regard, how would we describe somebody who's sour?
I think it's somebody who just can't bother to be pleasant. They don't see any reason to be pleasant. They may tend to criticize more easily than someone else. They don't see the bright side. We can also talk about a sour comment, or I left with a sour taste in my mouth.
That's right.
If something happened that left you feeling not very good.
That's a really good point. So left with a sour taste in my mouth, sour grapes. We usually say if someone has sour grapes, that usually means that they're disappointed and feel mistreated, and
maybe a little jealous.
Maybe
too?
a little jealous. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And then sour puss. I haven't heard that one in a while. But this person's such a sour puss.
Yeah.
right? They all revolve around the same kinds of emotion, which is grumpy, negative, kind of angry, unpleasant, and even in some cases jealous.
Yes.
That's a good point.
And often I think when we say a person is sour, it may not be intentional. It may just be their general attitude. I would say that's true for me.
What's another one? I think the next taste that comes to mind is spicy.
Sure. Yeah.
When we think of something spicy, it could be peppers. It's the first thing that comes to mind.
Right. Of course, I think of Indian cooking right away when I'm thinking of spicy or Latin American cooking. But I think it's fairly rare to use the term spicy for a person, but if you said it, I would certainly understand you, and it would be I would think it was positive in the sense of being very lively and interesting. In my mind, I think of spice as more, let's spice up this dress, or let's spice up this party by making something more interesting, by adding some new exciting thing. Is that your understanding?
Exactly. The word that comes to mind is exciting or excitable.
Yes.
Right. And so that's another word we can use to describe somebody. They're very excitable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Someone, for example, if I heard a comment and I got really emotional, really excited, or really angry really quickly, to me, that's a bit of a spicy personality. Easy to excite. And sometimes easy to get angry, quick-tempered.
Yeah.
We have sweet, sour, spicy. What's another one?
I think of bitter.
Bitter, that's right.
And again, that can be just neutral because it's one of the principles involved in cooking. But if we say a person is bitter, it can be quite negative and also quite tragic, even if something terrible has happened to the person and it's ruined their optimism, their positive attitude about life.
Bitter personality, bitter person. Bitter
Sarcastic, maybe sarcastic.
That's right. Bitter reminds me a bit of sour.
Yes.
But slightly different uses. It can be a slightly different. Like you said, it could be related to somebody's overall just negative outlook on life.
I agree. My feeling is that bitter, sour, it seems to me a person can just have a sour personality without a particular reason. And my feeling about bitter is that it may have been caused by something that someone has ugly feelings about, or a grudge, or nothing seems to have gone right for them in their lives. Do you have that same impression that there's a feeling of cause and effect a little bit?
I agree. Absolutely. I just realized there's another one that comes to mind. Bland.
Oh, yes. Dull, boring.
Right. But we talk about food that's bland. It has no taste.
That's right. That you're supposed to eat when you're sick.
That's right. White rice in and of itself is something that everyone is familiar with. It comes from all different countries. White rice alone is bland. It has no taste. And so when we describe somebody as having a bland personality, or just to say, oh, Mike is very bland, inherently that means the same thing. They have no interesting quality about them.
Yes. Or you can make a bland comment on purpose because you want to be diplomatic, or you don't want to take sides in an argument. So bland can have a neutral meaning or even a positive meaning in a certain situation. But usually I think it's kind of on the negative side, don't you?
That's right. So for comments, a bland comment can be sound pretty neutral. However, like you said, when you use it for people, bland typically is seen as a negative characteristic about somebody.
Yes,
right.
I agree.
We talk about tastes. Now, similarly, we can also talk about temperature, right? So we talk about the taste of food. We can also talk about the temperature of food in the same way. Cold, like a cold drink. Hot, warm. We can also use those words for people.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, when we think about something that's cold, the listeners probably have a clear understanding of the word cold when it comes to food or temperature. But when we use it to talk about somebody, what kind of images come to mind when you think of cold?
Well, certainly unfriendly, not welcoming, possibly intentional, possibly not. I think probably most of us have had at least one experience of someone we used to be friendly with changing their feelings towards us and becoming cold. They don't engage with us. They're distant.
Well, the funny thing is, when people think of the word cold, what is the exact opposite of cold in general?
Hot.
Right? But funny enough, when we talk about people, hot is not the exact opposite of cold. In this case, warm is.
You're right. Yes.
Right? So
and cool, that's right? Another story.
Exactly,
yes.
Right? So when we think of a person with a cold personality, the opposite of that is not hot, it's warm. They have a very warm personality. They're very welcoming. They're very open.
Friendly,
caring, hospitable.
Yes.
Sensitive. Right? So these are all positive characteristics, whereas cold is very negative, negative description. And then we can talk about someone that's cool. Right? So in this regard, how is cool used in modern day conversation?
Cool has really evolved. In fact, sometimes cool means hot.
That's true. Oh my gosh. That's very true.
Cool started out as a slang term, I think, in the 1950s, and then it kind of disappeared a little, and now it is absolutely a part of the vocabulary that everyone knows, and I think it's even used in other languages. So how to explain cool means not only okay, but really okay. Occasionally, if you say he's a cool guy, you can either mean he's very aware, he really knows what's going on. It could just mean he's nice, or it could mean that he's hot, which means sexy.
Yep. Or he's very interesting.
Yes, right? Yes.
Right. I find that some people use the word cool too much.
Yes, I agree.
And sometimes I think that what they mean to say is that's interesting or that's fascinating, right?
Good point. Yeah.
So when somebody has a cool personality, it can mean a number of different things. When someone is hot, then that just pretty much describes their looks.
Pretty much.
Right.
Yeah.
And that could be both for men and women.
Indeed.
Right. So this person, she's very hot. That just means that she is a very, very attractive person.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there's many different ways that we can use tastes and temperatures to describe people, personality, characteristic, and even appearance. Right?
Yeah. You mentioned the other day hot-headed versus cool-headed.
Oh my gosh, that's right. That's a good point.
And that is I think, quite easy to guess. Exactly what you hear is what you can imagine. Hot-headed, they get angry quickly, they don't think things through, and somebody who's cool-headed is quite steady and thinks first before they do anything or say anything.
So for the listening audience, you've learned some new ways to use words that you probably already know to describe people and personality. So I encourage you to think about your own personality. How would you describe yourself? Are you cool? Are you spicy? Are you sour? Are you always sweet? How would you describe yourself, your friends, your family? And if anything is a little difficult to understand, remember, this is a podcast. You can go all the way back to the beginning and listen again. Jane, welcome again to LPLE. It's so good to have you on the microphone. I really enjoyed this conversation.
So did I, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of LPLE. Let's practice listening in English from Dialogue FM. Subscribe to LPLE on iTunes to hear the latest episodes, or listen to past episodes on our website, dialogue.fm. That's dialog.fm. If you have questions or comments about English, or if you would like for us to use a word, grammar, or idiom in our conversation so you can learn how to use it correctly, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at dialogue.fm or Facebook at facebook.com/dialoguefm.